Picture this. A beautiful, ambitious nursing student drives into the snowy mountains of New Hampshire one cold February evening. Her car crashes on a lonely stretch of road. A kind stranger offers help, but she declines. Minutes later, when police arrive, the car is there, but she has vanished into thin air. For over 20 years now, her disappearance has haunted investigators, consumed her family, and spawned countless theories. This is the story of Maura Murray, a case that proves sometimes the most ordinary moments can lead to the most extraordinary mysteries. Welcome back to True Crime Continent, where we dive deep into the most mysterious, shocking, and unforgettable criminal cases from around the world. I'm your host, Olivia, and today we're about to explore another spine-chilling story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. If you're new here, True Crime Continent is your ultimate destination for in-depth documentaries that uncover the dark secrets hidden in plain sight. We don't just tell you what happened. We take you on a journey through every twist, every clue, and every heart-stopping moment that shaped these incredible cases. Before we begin today's investigation, if you're fascinated by true crime stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We upload new mind-blowing cases every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Your support helps us continue bringing you these detailed documentaries that take hours of research to create. Also, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy our content. It really helps us reach more true crime enthusiasts like yourself who crave these deep, investigative stories. Now, are you ready to enter the dark world of today's case? Let's begin our investigation into a story so twisted, so unbelievable, that it will haunt your thoughts long after this video ends. In the early 2000s, Maura Murray seemed to have everything going for her. Born on May 4th, 1982, this 21-year-old was the kind of young woman any parent would be proud of. At the University of Massachusetts Amherst, she was pursuing her dream of becoming a nurse, a calling that spoke to her caring nature and desire to help others. But who was Maura Murray beyond her academic achievements? She was an athlete, a runner who understood discipline and perseverance. She came from Hanson, Massachusetts, a small town where community mattered and neighbors knew each other's names. Her family described her as intelligent, determined, and fiercely independent, qualities that would later make her disappearance all the more puzzling. Maura wasn't just another college student going through the motions. She had plans, dreams, a future mapped out before her. She was working hard in her nursing program, balancing the demands of rigorous coursework with the normal social life of a college student. Those who knew her said she was reliable, the kind of person who showed up when she said she would. Yet beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, Maura was dealing with the same pressures that face many young adults. College can be overwhelming. The transition from teenager to adult brings its own set of challenges. Friends and family would later reveal that Maura had been going through some personal difficulties in the weeks leading up to February 9th, 2004. But nothing in her behavior suggested that she was planning to disappear forever. Nothing indicated that this bright, ambitious young woman was about to become the center of one of New Hampshire's most enduring mysteries. So what changed? What happened in those final weeks and days that led Maura to pack her belongings, withdraw money from her bank account, and drive north into the White Mountains of New Hampshire? The answers to these questions would become crucial pieces in a puzzle that investigators are still trying to solve more than 2 decades later. But let's start at the beginning, with the events that preceded that fateful February evening when everything changed. January 2004 had been a difficult month for Maura Murray. Like many college students, she was juggling multiple responsibilities and feeling the weight of academic pressure. But there were other stresses too, personal ones that would later become important clues in understanding her state of mind. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Maura had been involved in a minor car accident on campus. It wasn't serious, but it was another source of stress in an already challenging semester. She had also been dealing with some relationship issues, the kind of complicated romantic situations that can consume a young person's thoughts and emotions. Those close to Maura noticed that she seemed more stressed than usual. Her father, Fred Murray, would later recall that his daughter had called him about the car accident, and he had planned to come help her deal with the aftermath. But Maura was fiercely independent. She preferred to handle her own problems rather than burden others with them. What makes these final weeks so significant is that they paint a picture of someone under pressure, but not someone planning to disappear. Maura continued attending classes, completing assignments, maintaining her relationships with friends and family. She wasn't withdrawing from her life. She was actively engaged in it, even while dealing with stress. On February 8, 2004, just one day before her disappearance, Maura had worked her campus job at the university. She seemed normal to her coworkers, going about her duties without any sign that this would be her last day. She returned to her dorm room that evening and spent time with her roommate, making plans for the next day. But something happened that night or early the next morning that changed everything. What could have occurred in those quiet hours between February 8th and 9th that would lead a responsible nursing student to suddenly pack her belongings and drive into the mountains? Was it a sudden decision, or had Maura been planning something that no one around her realized? The timeline of February 9th, 2004 would become one of the most scrutinized days in the history of missing persons cases. Every email sent, every conversation had, every decision made would be analyzed and reanalyzed by investigators, amateur sleuths, and family members desperate for answers. February 9th, 2004 started like any other Monday for Maura Murray. She woke up in her dorm room at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, seemingly ready to tackle another day of classes and responsibilities. But as the hours unfolded, it became clear that this Monday would be unlike any other in her life. That morning, Maura did something completely out of character. She submitted her homework assignments electronically, responsible student behavior that suggested she was thinking about her academic obligations. But then she did something that would later puzzle everyone who knew her. She sent emails to several of her professors claiming there had been a death in the family and that she needed to be away from school for a few days. Here's the chilling part. There had been no death in the family. Maura's relatives were all accounted for and very much alive. So why would a normally honest and straightforward young woman lie to her professors? What was she planning that required this deception? After sending those mysterious emails, Maura's actions became even more puzzling. She packed her belongings, not just clothes for a few days, but personal items that suggested a longer absence. She gathered her textbooks, her nursing supplies, even sentimental objects that most people wouldn't take on a short trip. Then came another unusual behavior. Maura went to an ATM and withdrew $280 from her bank account. For a college student, this represented a significant amount of cash. She followed this by visiting a local liquor store where she purchased several bottles of alcohol. Again, this wasn't typical behavior for Maura, who was focused on her studies and generally responsible about drinking. What was she thinking during these hours? Was she planning a spontaneous getaway to clear her head? Was she meeting someone? Or was something more serious driving her decisions? The people who saw her that morning would later say she seemed determined but not distressed. She appeared to be following a plan, even if no one else knew what that plan was. By early afternoon, Maura had loaded her belongings into her 1996 black Saturn. She had told no one where she was going, not her roommate, not her family, not her closest friends. She simply got in her car and began driving north toward New Hampshire's White Mountains. The White Mountains held special significance for Maura. She had vacationed there with her family, creating happy memories among the scenic peaks and valleys. Perhaps she was seeking comfort in a familiar place, or maybe she chose the location for reasons that died with her disappearance. As Maura's car merged onto the highway that afternoon, heading north into increasingly mountainous terrain. She could not have known that she was driving toward one of the most perplexing mysteries in American criminal history. Every mile she traveled that day would later be retraced by investigators. Every decision she made would be questioned and analyzed. But in that moment, she was just a young woman driving through the New England countryside, carrying secrets that she would never have the chance to reveal. As Maura Murray's black Saturn wound its way through the New England landscape on that February afternoon, she was traveling a route that would become infamous in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The journey from Amherst, Massachusetts, to the White Mountains of New Hampshire should have been a peaceful drive through some of America's most beautiful countryside. Instead, it became the final confirmed chapter of a young woman's life. What was going through Maura's mind as she drove north that Monday afternoon? Was she seeking solitude in the mountains she had visited with her family? Was she planning to meet someone? Or was she simply trying to escape the pressures that had been building in her life? These questions would torment her family and investigators for decades to come. The route Maura chose took her through small New England towns, past snow-covered fields and forests that would soon become the backdrop for one of the most extensive missing persons searches in New Hampshire history. She drove through communities where life moved at a slower pace, where neighbors still looked out for each other, and where a young woman traveling alone would have been noticed and remembered. As evening approached, Maura was navigating increasingly rural roads. The White Mountains region of New Hampshire is known for its dramatic beauty, but it can also be isolating and dangerous, especially in winter. The temperature was dropping, snow was on the ground, and daylight was fading. For a young woman alone in an unfamiliar area, these conditions should have been cause for caution. But Maura continued driving, following Route 112 through the town of Haverhill, a small community nestled in the mountains. This stretch of road would become ground zero for one of the most puzzling disappearances in modern times. Route 112 is a winding mountain road that can be treacherous in winter conditions. It passes through dense forests, crosses small bridges, and offers few places to stop or seek help if something goes wrong. What happened next would change everything. At approximately 7:25 p.m., somewhere along Route 112 near Woodsville, a village within the town of Haverhill, Maura Murray's journey came to an abrupt end. Her black Saturn crashed on this lonely stretch of mountain road, setting in motion a series of events that continue to baffle investigators more than 20 years later. The crash itself wasn't particularly severe, the kind of minor accident that happens thousands of times every winter in New England. But what made this crash different was what happened next, or more accurately, what didn't happen next. Most accident victims wait for help, call family members, or accept assistance from Good Samaritans. Maura Murray did none of these things. Instead, she vanished into the February darkness, leaving behind only questions and a mystery that has consumed the resources of multiple law enforcement agencies, inspired countless theories, and broken the hearts of a family that has never stopped searching for answers. At 7:25 p.m. on February 9th, 2004, the sound of crumpling metal and breaking glass echoed through the quiet mountains of New Hampshire. Maura Murray's black Saturn had struck a tree on Route 112, near the weathered barn curve in Haverhill. The impact wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough to disable the vehicle and leave it smoking in the cold February air. What happened in the moments immediately after the crash would become some of the most analyzed minutes in the history of missing persons cases. Every second, every interaction, every decision made by Maura Murray during this brief window of time would be scrutinized by investigators, debated by amateur detectives, and agonized over by her family. The first person to encounter Maura after the crash was Butch Atwood, a local bus driver who lived nearby and was returning home from his route. Atwood saw the smoking Saturn and immediately recognized that someone needed help. He pulled over and approached the vehicle, where he found Maura Murray behind the wheel. What Atwood witnessed would become crucial testimony in the investigation. He described Maura as appearing shaken but not seriously injured. She was coherent and able to speak normally. Most importantly, she declined his offer to call for help or to use his phone to call someone herself. This decision, to refuse assistance from a Good Samaritan, would later be seen as highly significant. Why would a young woman, alone on a dark mountain road with a disabled vehicle, refuse help from someone offering assistance? Was she afraid of getting in trouble? Was she planning to handle the situation herself? Or was there something else, something we may never understand, that motivated her decision? Atwood later said that Maura appeared to be alone in the vehicle, though this detail would later be questioned by some investigators and theorists. He also noted that she seemed to be trying to get the car started, suggesting that she was hoping to continue her journey rather than wait for professional help. After Maura declined his assistance, Atwood continued to his home, which was only about 100 yards away from the crash site. True to his word and concerned for the young woman's safety, he called 911 to report the accident. This call, made at 7:27 p.m., just 2 minutes after the estimated time of the crash, would bring law enforcement to the scene. But here's where the mystery deepens into something truly inexplicable. When Sergeant Cecil Smith of the Haverhill Police arrived at the scene at approximately 7:46 p.m., he found the Saturn exactly where it had crashed. The doors were locked, the airbags had deployed, and there were signs of the recent accident. But Maura Murray was nowhere to be found. In the roughly 20 minutes between Butch Atwood's encounter with Maura and the arrival of police, a young woman had simply vanished into the New Hampshire wilderness. She left behind her damaged vehicle, her purse, her cell phone, and most of her personal belongings. What she took with her, if anything, remains unknown to this day. When Sergeant Cecil Smith arrived at the crash scene on Route 112 that cold February night, he was expecting to find a straightforward car accident, the kind of routine call that small-town police officers handle regularly, especially during New Hampshire's harsh winter months. What he found instead was the beginning of one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in modern American history. The abandoned Saturn told a story, but it was a story full of questions rather than answers. The vehicle had clearly been involved in a recent accident. The front end was damaged, the airbags had deployed, and there was a crack in the windshield. Inside the car, investigators would later discover several bottles of alcohol, including some that had been damaged in the crash, filling the vehicle with the smell of spilled liquor. But where was the driver? Sergeant Smith immediately began searching the immediate area around the crash site. He called out, hoping to hear a response from someone who might be injured and hiding in the nearby woods. He checked ditches, looked behind trees, and searched anywhere a person might have taken shelter. The search turned up nothing. What made Maura's disappearance even more puzzling was how quickly it had occurred. Based on witness statements and the timeline of events, she had vanished in a window of roughly 20 minutes. Even if she had decided to walk away from the scene, where could she have gone in such a short time, especially in winter conditions and unfamiliar terrain? The immediate area around the crash site was a mix of dense forest, private residences, and rural roads. If Maura had chosen to walk for help, there were houses nearby where she could have sought assistance. If she had been injured and disoriented, search dogs should have been able to track her scent. If she had been picked up by a passing motorist, someone should have seen or remembered the encounter. As word of Maura's disappearance spread, the search effort quickly expanded. The New Hampshire State Police were called in, along with the Fish and Game Department, which had expertise in wilderness searches. Local volunteer fire departments and search and rescue teams were mobilized. Within hours, dozens of trained searchers were combing the area around Route 112. The search effort would eventually involve multiple agencies and hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters scanned the forest canopy from above, while ground teams methodically worked their way through the dense woods. Search dogs were brought in to try to track Maura's scent, but they too came up empty. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The family's anguish was immediate and profound. Fred Murray, Maura's father, received the call that every parent dreads: his daughter was missing under mysterious circumstances. He immediately drove to New Hampshire and became not just a grieving father but an active participant in the search effort and investigation. As the hours turned into days, the search area was expanded to cover thousands of acres of wilderness. Every hiking trail, every logging road, every possible route Maura might have taken was carefully examined. Searchers looked for any sign, clothing, footprints, personal belongings that might indicate where she had gone. But the mountains of New Hampshire seemed to have swallowed Maura Murray without a trace. The search, which began as a rescue mission hoping to find an injured young woman, gradually transformed into something else entirely: a quest for answers to one of the most baffling disappearances in American criminal history. As investigators began to piece together the events of February 9th, 2004, they discovered that Maura Murray's belongings told a complex and sometimes contradictory story. Each item found in her abandoned Saturn seemed to raise more questions than it answered, creating a puzzle that has frustrated law enforcement professionals for over 2 decades. Inside the damaged vehicle, police found Maura's purse containing her identification, credit cards, and a small amount of cash. This discovery was significant because it suggested that whatever had happened to Maura, she likely hadn't taken her most essential belongings with her. Most people, even in a state of panic or confusion, would grab their wallet and identification if they were planning to leave voluntarily. The alcohol found in the car presented another mystery. There were several bottles, including some that had been broken in the crash, creating the strong smell that Sergeant Smith noticed when he first approached the vehicle. But here's what puzzled investigators. Maura had just purchased this alcohol earlier that day, suggesting it was intended for consumption during her trip. Was she planning to drink alone in the mountains? Was she bringing it to share with someone else? Even more intriguing was Maura's cell phone, which was found in the car along with her other personal belongings. In 2004, cell phones weren't as ubiquitous as they are today, but most young people wouldn't leave home without them. The fact that Maura's phone remained in the vehicle suggested either that she left the scene in a hurry or that she was prevented from taking it with her. Investigators also found directions that Maura had printed out, apparently related to her planned destination in the White Mountains area. These directions suggested that she had a specific place in mind when she began her journey north. But when police checked the locations indicated by the directions, they found no sign that Maura had ever arrived at any of them. Perhaps most mysteriously, investigators discovered that Maura had packed much more than would be needed for a short getaway. Her belongings included textbooks, nursing supplies, and personal items that suggested she might have been planning an extended absence from school. This raised the question: was Maura's trip to New Hampshire a spur-of-the-moment decision, or had she been planning something more permanent? The physical evidence from the crash scene itself provided few additional clues. The damage to the Saturn was consistent with hitting a tree at a relatively low speed. There were no signs of another vehicle being involved, no indication of foul play at the scene, and no evidence of a struggle. If someone had harmed Maura or forced her to leave the scene, they had done so without leaving any physical traces. Forensic experts examined every inch of the vehicle and the surrounding area. They looked for fingerprints other than Maura's, checked for signs of another person having been in the car, and analyzed any potential DNA evidence. The results were frustratingly inconclusive. Everything they found was consistent with Maura having been alone in the vehicle, but it didn't explain where she had gone after the crash. The lack of concrete physical evidence forced investigators to focus on witness statements and the timeline of events. But even these supposedly reliable sources of information would prove to be complicated and sometimes contradictory, adding new layers of mystery to an already baffling case. In any missing persons case, witness testimony can provide crucial pieces of the puzzle. But in Maura Murray's disappearance, the accounts from the few people who saw or interacted with her that night have created almost as many questions as answers. Each witness brought forward important information, But their stories also contained details that would fuel decades of speculation and debate. Butch Atwood, the bus driver who was the last confirmed person to speak with Maura, became a central figure in the investigation. His account of their brief interaction has been analyzed countless times by investigators, amateur sleuths, and family members searching for clues about Maura's state of mind and intentions. According to Atwood, Maura appeared shaken but coherent when he offered help. She declined his assistance politely but firmly, saying that she had already called AAA and that help was on the way. This statement would later prove to be untrue. Maura had not called AAA, and her cell phone had no signal in that area anyway. Why would she lie to someone who was genuinely trying to help her? Some investigators believe that Maura was simply trying to avoid getting in trouble, perhaps because she had been drinking or because she was worried about the consequences of the accident. Others wonder if her refusal of help was motivated by fear, either of Atwood himself or of someone else she might have been trying to avoid. Another witness account came from a school bus driver who reported seeing a young woman running down Route 112 shortly after the time of Maura's crash. This sighting, if accurate, could provide crucial information about Maura's movements after she left the crash scene. However, the witness was driving a bus full of children and didn't get a clear look at the person they saw. The identification remains uncertain. Perhaps even more intriguing was a report from a couple who lived near the crash site. They claimed to have seen a red truck parked near Maura's Saturn around the time of the accident. The truck was gone by the time police arrived, and no one has ever been able to identify who was driving it or why they were in the area. This mysterious red truck has become one of the most discussed elements of the case, representing either an innocent coincidence or a crucial clue to Maura's disappearance. Faith Westman, a neighbor who lived close to the crash site, also provided important testimony. She heard what she believed was the sound of the accident and looked out her window to see the damaged Saturn. She considered going out to help but decided to call 911 instead. Her account helped establish the timeline of the crash and confirmed that Maura's vehicle was indeed at the scene immediately after the accident. However, Westman also reported seeing what appeared to be a man smoking a cigarette near the car. This detail didn't match other witness accounts and couldn't be confirmed by investigators. It raised the possibility that someone else was at the crash scene, either helping Maura or potentially harming her. The conflicting nature of these witness accounts has been a source of frustration for investigators and hope for family members. Each new detail offers the possibility of a breakthrough, but the contradictions between different witnesses' stories have made it difficult to establish exactly what happened during those crucial 20 minutes between the crash and the arrival of police. Were these witnesses all seeing the same events but remembering them differently? Were there multiple people at the crash scene who haven't been identified? Or do these conflicting accounts suggest something more sinister, perhaps an attempt by someone to cover up their involvement in Maura's disappearance? As days turned into weeks with no sign of Maura Murray, law enforcement agencies began to expand their investigation beyond the immediate search for a missing person. The New Hampshire State Police, working in coordination with local authorities and eventually the FBI, started to consider the possibility that Maura's disappearance might involve foul play. The investigation took on new urgency and complexity as detectives began to dig deeper into Maura's personal life, looking for any clues that might explain her sudden disappearance. They interviewed her family members, friends, professors, and classmates, trying to build a complete picture of her mental state and activities in the weeks leading up to February 9th. What they discovered was a young woman dealing with typical college stresses, but also some unusual pressures. Maura had been involved in a campus security job, which gave her access to buildings and information that most students didn't have. She had also been dealing with some personal relationship issues that may have been weighing on her mind. Investigators also learned about Maura's previous car accident on campus, just days before her disappearance. Some theorists have suggested that this earlier accident was more significant than initially believed, possibly involving alcohol or creating legal problems that Maura was trying to escape. However, Campus police records suggested it was a minor incident with no serious consequences. The investigation expanded to include Maura's phone records, email accounts, and financial transactions. Detectives traced her movements on February 9th in minute detail, confirming her cash withdrawal, alcohol purchase, and the route she took into New Hampshire. They interviewed everyone who had interacted with her that day, looking for any clues about her intentions or state of mind. One of the most significant developments came when investigators began to focus on the area around the crash site more intensively. They conducted extensive searches of nearby properties, including several homes where Maura might have sought help or where someone might have taken her against her will. These searches involved cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and careful examination of any location where evidence might have been hidden. The investigation also began to consider various theories about what might have happened to Maura. Was her disappearance voluntary? A young woman overwhelmed by life's pressures who decided to start over somewhere new? Was it the result of an accident? Perhaps Maura wandered into the woods, became lost, and succumbed to the harsh February weather? Or was it something more sinister? An abduction, or worse, by someone who happened upon her at her most vulnerable moment? Each theory required different investigative approaches. If Maura had left voluntarily, investigators needed to look for signs of her creating a new identity or accessing financial resources. If she had died accidentally in the wilderness, search teams needed to expand their efforts to more remote areas. If she had been the victim of a crime, detectives needed to identify and investigate potential suspects. The case also attracted significant media attention, which brought both benefits and challenges to the investigation. News coverage helped generate tips from the public and kept Maura's story in the spotlight, but it also attracted amateur investigators and conspiracy theorists who sometimes interfered with official search efforts. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Maura Murray's disappearance was unlike typical missing persons cases. The combination of mysterious circumstances, lack of physical evidence, and conflicting witness accounts created a perfect storm of confusion that has persisted for more than 2 decades. While law enforcement agencies conducted their official investigation, Maura Murray's family launched their own desperate search for answers. Led by her father, Fred Murray, the family refused to accept that their daughter had simply vanished without a trace. Their determination to find Maura would become one of the most sustained family-led investigations in the history of missing persons cases. Fred Murray, a truck driver with no formal investigative training, transformed himself into a relentless advocate for his missing daughter. He traveled to New Hampshire repeatedly, sometimes camping in the woods near the crash site for days at a time, searching for any clue that professional investigators might have missed. His dedication was both inspiring and heartbreaking, a father who refused to give up hope. The Murray family's search efforts went far beyond simply waiting for updates from police. They hired private investigators, consulted with psychics and spiritual advisors, and pursued every lead, no matter how unlikely it seemed. They offered rewards for information, distributed missing person flyers throughout New England, and used emerging internet technologies to spread awareness about Maura's case. Julie Murray, Maura's sister, became another powerful voice in the search effort. She organized search parties, maintained contact with media outlets, and used social media platforms to keep her sister's story alive in the public consciousness. Julie's advocacy helped ensure that Maura's case remained active even when other missing persons cases faded from public attention. The family also had to cope with the emotional toll of their loss while simultaneously conducting an investigation. They dealt with false hope from promising leads that led nowhere, frustration with the limitations of official investigations, and the constant pain of not knowing what had happened to their loved one. Yet they persisted year after year, never giving up their search for answers. One of the family's most significant contributions to the case was their ability to generate and maintain public interest. Through interviews, documentaries, and online advocacy, they kept Maura's story in the spotlight long after typical media coverage would have faded. This sustained attention led to new witnesses coming forward, additional searches being conducted, and continued pressure on law enforcement to keep the case active. The Murray family also had to navigate the complex world of amateur investigators and internet sleuths who became fascinated with Maura's case. While some of these individuals provided helpful insights and research, others spread false information or pursued conspiracy theories that complicated the search effort. The family had to learn to distinguish between legitimate help and well-meaning but misguided interference. Perhaps most importantly, the family's search efforts helped ensure that Maura Murray was remembered as more than just a missing person. Through their advocacy, she remained a real person with dreams, relationships, and a family who loved her desperately. Their efforts humanized a case that could easily have become just another statistic in the files of unsolved disappearances. The family's persistence also led to important developments in the case. Their pressure on law enforcement agencies helped ensure that new leads were investigated, that emerging technologies were applied to old evidence, and that the case remained a priority even as years passed. Their advocacy demonstrated the crucial role that families can play in keeping missing persons cases alive. Over the 2 decades since Maura Murray's disappearance, numerous theories have emerged to explain what happened to her on that February night in 2004. Each theory has its supporters and detractors, and none has been definitively proven or disproven. These competing explanations reflect the complexity and mystery of a case that has defied simple answers. The voluntary disappearance theory suggests that Maura planned her own disappearance to escape pressures in her life. Supporters of this theory point to her email lies about a family death, her cash withdrawal, and the fact that she packed more belongings than necessary for a short trip. They believe that Maura saw the car accident as an opportunity to stage her own disappearance and start a new life somewhere else. However, this theory faces significant challenges. Maura left behind her identification, credit cards, and cell phone, items that would be difficult to live without in modern society. She also had no known history of wanting to disappear, and her family insists that despite her stresses, she was not someone who would voluntarily cut ties with everyone she loved. The accidental death theory proposes that Maura left the crash scene on foot, became lost in the wilderness, and died from exposure or other natural causes. New Hampshire's mountains can be deadly in winter, and it's possible that Maura simply misjudged the danger and wandered too far into the woods before succumbing to the elements. This theory seems plausible given the harsh winter conditions and Maura's unfamiliarity with the specific area where she crashed. However, extensive searches have failed to turn up any physical evidence of Maura in the surrounding wilderness. Modern search techniques, including cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, should have located her remains if she died close to the crash site. The foul play theory suggests that Maura was abducted or harmed by someone who encountered her at the crash site. This could have been a random predator who happened upon a vulnerable young woman, or someone with a more specific connection to Maura. The mysterious red truck seen near the crash site has featured prominently in this theory. Evidence supporting foul play includes the rapid timeline of Maura's disappearance and the lack of any trace of her in the wilderness despite extensive searches. However, there's no physical evidence of a struggle or abduction, and no clear suspect has ever been identified despite extensive investigation. Some theorists have proposed that Maura was picked up by someone she knew, perhaps someone she had arranged to meet in New Hampshire. This would explain why she declined help from Butch Atwood and why she seemed to have a specific destination in mind. However, investigators have found no evidence of such an arrangement, and Maura's friends and family insist they know of no one she might have been planning to meet. More elaborate conspiracy theories have also emerged, involving everything from witness cover-ups to law enforcement misconduct. Some amateur investigators have suggested that key evidence was overlooked or suppressed, though professional investigators strongly dispute these claims. The tandem driver theory suggests that Maura was following or being followed by another vehicle when she crashed. This would explain how she was able to leave the scene so quickly and why no trace of her was found in the immediate area. However, no credible evidence of a second vehicle has ever been established. Each of these theories has been examined and re-examined by professional investigators, family members, and amateur sleuths. The fact that none has been definitively proven or disproven speaks to the genuine mystery at the heart of Maura Murray's disappearance. After more than 20 years, her fate remains unknown, and the case continues to generate new theories and renewed investigation efforts. As years passed without resolution, the Maura Murray case periodically generated renewed interest and fresh investigative efforts. New technologies, changed personnel, and emerging leads prompted law enforcement agencies to revisit the case with modern tools and perspectives that weren't available during the initial investigation. In 2017, the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit took a fresh look at Maura's disappearance using updated investigative techniques. Cold case units specialize in applying new methods to old cases, often uncovering evidence that was missed or unavailable during the original investigation. Their involvement brought renewed hope to the Murray family and new attention to the case. One significant development came in 2019 when authorities conducted an extensive search of a property not far from the crash site. This search involved multiple agencies, including the FBI, and utilized advanced equipment, including ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The search was based on a tip that suggested Maura might have been buried on the property. The 2019 search generated significant media attention and raised hopes that the case might finally be solved. Investigators spent several days meticulously examining the property, but ultimately found no evidence related to Maura's disappearance. While disappointing, the search demonstrated that law enforcement remained committed to pursuing credible leads no matter how much time had passed. Advances in DNA technology have also offered new possibilities for the case. Modern forensic techniques can extract and analyze DNA from much smaller and more degraded samples than was possible in 2004. If any physical evidence from Maura's disappearance is ever discovered, these new technologies might be able to provide answers that weren't available during the original investigation. The rise of social media and online communities has also transformed how missing persons cases are investigated and discussed. Websites, forums, and social media groups dedicated to Maura's case have attracted thousands of amateur investigators from around the world. While some of their work has been helpful in keeping the case alive and generating new leads, it has also complicated the investigation with misinformation and unfounded theories. Digital forensics has become another important tool in cold case investigations. Investigators have re-examined Maura's email accounts, phone records, and any digital footprint she might have left behind. They've also looked for any online activity that might suggest she survived her disappearance and created a new identity elsewhere. The case has also benefited from improved coordination between different law enforcement agencies. Modern information sharing systems make it easier for investigators to connect seemingly unrelated cases or pieces of evidence that might be relevant to Maura's disappearance. In recent years, several high-profile missing persons cases have been solved using new investigative techniques, giving hope to families like the Murrays that answers might still be possible. Cases that seemed hopeless have been cracked using everything from genetic genealogy to advanced satellite imagery analysis. However, despite these technological advances and renewed investigative efforts, Maura Murray's case remains unsolved. Each new search, each new lead, each new theory brings both hope and disappointment to a family that has been living with uncertainty for more than 2 decades. The disappearance of Maura Murray has generated an extraordinary amount of media attention and public fascination, transforming a local missing person case into one of the most discussed unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. This attention has been both a blessing and a curse for the investigation and the Murray family. The case first gained national attention through traditional media outlets, with newspapers, television news programs, and magazines covering Maura's disappearance and the ongoing search efforts. The mysterious circumstances of her vanishing, a young, attractive college student who disappeared without a trace after a car accident, captured the public imagination and generated widespread interest. The emergence of internet forums and discussion boards dedicated to true crime cases gave Maura's story a new platform and a dedicated community of amateur investigators. Websites like Topics and later Reddit hosted extensive discussions about every aspect of the case, with users analyzing evidence, proposing theories, and sharing information. This online community has been remarkably persistent, with some users dedicating years to researching and discussing the case. They've created detailed timelines, maps of the area, and extensive databases of information related to Maura's disappearance. Some have even traveled to New Hampshire to conduct their own searches and investigations. The case gained even more attention with the launch of the Missing Maura Murray podcast in 2016. Hosted by Lance Rienstierna and Tim Polari, the podcast conducted extensive interviews with key figures in the case and brought new attention to unresolved questions. The podcast format allowed for detailed exploration of the case in a way that traditional media coverage couldn't match. Television documentaries have also featured Maura's case prominently. Shows like Disappeared on Investigation Discovery have aired multiple episodes about her disappearance, each bringing the case to new audiences and generating fresh tips and leads for investigators. However, this intense media attention hasn't been entirely positive. The case has attracted conspiracy theorists and individuals who have spread misinformation or pursued false leads. Some amateur investigators have crossed ethical boundaries, harassing witnesses, or interfering with official investigations. The Murray family has had a complex relationship with media coverage. While they've appreciated the attention that keeps Maura's case in the public eye, they've also struggled with inaccurate reporting, invasive coverage, and the commodification of their personal tragedy for entertainment purposes. Social media has added another dimension to the case, with Facebook groups, Twitter accounts, and YouTube channels dedicated to discussing Maura's disappearance. These platforms have made it easier for people interested in the case to share information and theories, but they've also made it more difficult to distinguish between credible information and speculation. The intense public interest in Maura's case reflects broader cultural fascination with true crime stories, particularly those involving young women who disappear under mysterious circumstances. Her case shares similarities with other high-profile disappearances that have captured public attention, though few have generated the sustained interest that Maura's story has maintained. This media attention has had real-world consequences for the investigation. Tips generated by media coverage have led to new searches and investigative efforts. However, the volume of tips, many based on speculation rather than actual knowledge, has also created additional work for investigators who must evaluate every lead, no matter how unlikely. The case has also become a cautionary tale about the potential negative effects of intense media attention on missing persons investigations. While publicity can be crucial for generating leads and keeping cases active, it can also complicate investigations and add additional stress to families already dealing with tremendous loss. More than 20 years after Maura Murray vanished on that cold February night, her disappearance remains one of New Hampshire's most perplexing unsolved cases. Despite extensive searches, numerous investigations, countless theories, and sustained media attention, the question of what happened to Maura continues to haunt investigators, her family, and the countless people who have become invested in finding the truth. The passage of time has brought both challenges and opportunities to the case. While physical evidence may have degraded and memories may have faded, new technologies and investigative techniques continue to offer hope for a breakthrough. Cold case units across the country have successfully solved decades-old disappearances using methods that weren't available in 2004. For the Murray family, each passing year brings both the pain of continued uncertainty and the determination to keep searching for answers. They've had to learn to live with the possibility that they may never know what happened to Maura, while simultaneously refusing to give up hope that someday they'll get the closure they desperately seek. The investigators who have worked on Maura's case over the years have also been deeply affected by its unresolved status. Many law enforcement professionals are driven by the desire to bring closure to families and justice to victims. When a case remains unsolved despite their best efforts, it can be both personally and professionally frustrating. What makes Maura's case particularly challenging is the lack of definitive evidence pointing in any single direction. In many cold cases, investigators have a clear crime to solve, they know someone was murdered, and they need to identify the perpetrator. In Maura's case, investigators still don't know with certainty whether a crime was even committed. This ambiguity has allowed multiple theories to persist and has made it difficult to focus investigative resources effectively. Should investigators prioritize searching for Maura's remains in the wilderness? Should they focus on potential suspects who might have harmed her? Should they explore the possibility that she's still alive somewhere under a new identity? The case has also highlighted the limitations of missing persons investigations, particularly in rural areas with limited resources. The initial response to Maura's disappearance was hampered by jurisdictional issues, limited manpower, and the assumption that she might have left voluntarily. By the time the investigation ramped up to treat her disappearance as potentially criminal, crucial time had already been lost. Technology has changed dramatically since 2004, and investigators continue to explore how new tools might be applied to Maura's case. Cell phone tracking, digital forensics, social media analysis, and advanced DNA testing all offer possibilities that weren't available during the original investigation. The case has also benefited from increased awareness and resources dedicated to missing persons cases generally. Organizations like the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS, have improved information sharing and coordination between agencies working on cold cases. Despite all these efforts and advances, Maura Murray's fate remains unknown. She exists in a liminal space, neither confirmed dead nor found alive. Her family continues to search, investigators continue to investigate, and the public continues to speculate. The case has become a symbol of the thousands of people who disappear each year in America and are never found. But Maura's story is more than just a mystery to be solved. She was a real person with hopes, dreams, fears, and relationships. She had a future that was cut short, plans that were never fulfilled, and people who loved her and continue to miss her every day. Whatever happened to her on February 9, 2004, represents not just a puzzle to be solved, but a life that was lost and a family that was shattered. As we near the end of our journey through the mystery of Maura Murray's disappearance, it's important to understand that this story doesn't have a conclusion. Not yet. The search for Maura continues today, more than 2 decades after she vanished on Route 112, and involves not just her family and law enforcement, but a community of people from around the world who refuse to let her case fade into obscurity. The New Hampshire State Police continue to classify Maura Murray as a missing person, and they continue to investigate credible leads as they arise. The case remains open and active, with investigators ready to pursue any new evidence or information that might finally provide answers. Modern law enforcement agencies understand that cold cases can be solved years or even decades after the original crime, and they maintain hope that Maura's case will eventually be resolved. Recent years have seen several developments that keep hope alive. In 2022, investigators announced that they were using advanced DNA testing on evidence from the case, though they haven't released the results of these tests. They've also continued to follow up on tips and leads, including some generated by the sustained media attention the case continues to receive. The Murray family's dedication to finding Maura has never wavered. Julie Murray continues to advocate for her sister through social media, interviews, and public appearances. She's worked to keep the case in the public eye while also pushing for improvements in how missing persons cases are handled generally. Her advocacy has helped other families facing similar situations and has contributed to changes in law enforcement protocols. Fred Murray, now in his 70s, continues to believe that someday he'll get answers about what happened to his daughter. His transformation from a truck driver to a tireless advocate for his missing child has been remarkable, and his dedication has inspired others facing similar tragedies. Even as the years have passed, he hasn't given up hope that Maura might still be alive somewhere. The online community that has formed around Maura's case remains active and engaged. New theories continue to emerge, old evidence is re-examined, and discussions about the case continue on various platforms. While some of this activity has been counterproductive, much of it has been genuinely helpful in keeping the case alive and generating new leads for investigators. Technology continues to evolve, offering new possibilities for solving cold cases like Maura's. Genetic genealogy has revolutionized many missing persons investigations, allowing investigators to identify victims and suspects using DNA and publicly available genealogical databases. If any physical evidence from Maura's case contains usable DNA, these new techniques might finally provide answers. Satellite imagery and mapping technology have also advanced significantly since 2004. Some amateur investigators have used these tools to search for potential burial sites or other locations where Maura might be found. While none of these efforts have been successful so far, they represent the kind of innovative approaches that might eventually crack the case. The case has also influenced how law enforcement agencies handle missing persons cases, particularly those involving young adults who might be assumed to have left voluntarily. Maura's disappearance has highlighted the importance of treating all missing persons cases seriously from the beginning and of maintaining active investigations even when initial leads don't pan out. But perhaps most importantly, the continued search for Maura Murray represents something larger than just one missing person case. It represents the refusal to give up on people who have disappeared, the commitment to families who are suffering, and the belief that every person deserves to be found and remembered. Maura Murray was a daughter, a sister, a student, and a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She had dreams of becoming a nurse, of helping others, of making a difference in the world. Those dreams were cut short on a lonely mountain road in New Hampshire, but her memory lives on through the people who continue to search for her. As we conclude this haunting journey through one of America's most enduring mysteries, the disappearance of Maura Murray serves as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. In a matter of minutes on that February night in 2004, a promising young woman vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. Maura's case occurred in Grafton County, New Hampshire, along Route 112 in the town of Haverhill. The mystery was essentially uncovered immediately. Within 20 minutes of her crash, she was gone. However, the true scope of the mystery has never been resolved, despite over 20 years of investigation by multiple agencies, including the Haverhill Police Department, New Hampshire State Police, and the FBI. To this day, no arrests have been made in connection with Maura's disappearance. No perpetrator has been identified, tried, or imprisoned. The case remains open and unsolved, with investigators still hoping for that crucial breakthrough that will finally provide answers. Because Maura Murray's body has never been found, there has been no burial, no funeral service to provide closure to her grieving family. Instead, they've had to find other ways to honor her memory, through continued search efforts, advocacy for other missing persons, and by ensuring that her story continues to be told. The memories Maura leaves behind are those of a bright, determined young woman who cared deeply about helping others. Her dreams of becoming a nurse reflected her compassionate nature and her desire to make a positive difference in the world. Her family remembers her laugh, her determination, her kindness, and her fierce independence. These memories remain vivid and precious to those who loved her, even as the mystery of her disappearance continues to haunt them. The moral lesson of Maura Murray's story is complex and multifaceted. It reminds us that life is fragile and can change in an instant. It shows us the importance of family bonds and the lengths that love will drive people to go in search of truth. It demonstrates that some mysteries may never be solved, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying to solve them. Maura's case also teaches us about the power of persistence, both in investigation and in hope. Her family's refusal to give up, law enforcement's continued efforts, and the public's sustained interest have kept her story alive when it might otherwise have been forgotten. This persistence may yet lead to answers. Perhaps most importantly, Maura's story reminds us that behind every missing person case is a real human being with hopes, dreams, fears, and people who love them. These aren't just puzzles to be solved or stories to be consumed for entertainment. They represent real tragedies that continue to affect real people every single day. As we reach the end of this story, imagine for a moment what it would be like to be Maura's family, living with uncertainty for more than 20 years, never knowing what happened to someone they loved deeply. Imagine the strength it takes to continue hoping, continue searching, continue believing that answers might still come. Their courage in the face of such prolonged uncertainty is truly remarkable. Now imagine yourself on that cold February night, driving alone through the mountains of New Hampshire. You crash your car on a lonely road, a stranger offers help, and you make a decision that will determine your fate. What would you do? Who would you trust? These split-second choices can change everything, and we may never know what led Maura Murray to make the decisions she made that night. The mystery of what happened to Maura Murray remains unsolved, but her story continues. Somewhere out there, the truth exists, whether it lies in the mountains of New Hampshire, in the memories of someone who has never come forward, or in evidence that hasn't yet been discovered. Until that truth is revealed, the search continues, the questions remain, and the hope for answers endures. As you reflect on Maura Murray's mysterious disappearance and the decades of searching that followed, what do you think really happened to her on that February night in 2004? Do you believe she met with foul play, succumbed to the harsh mountain wilderness, or somehow managed to disappear voluntarily and start a new life? More importantly, what would you want your loved ones to do if you vanished without a trace? Would you want them to never stop searching? Or would you want them to eventually find peace and move on? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, somewhere, the truth about Maura Murray is still waiting to be discovered. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of America's most perplexing missing person cases. The story of Maura Murray reminds us that truth can be elusive, that families never stop loving, and that some mysteries continue to haunt us long after they begin. If this case has touched you the way it has touched so many others, consider sharing Maura's story, supporting organizations that help missing persons' families, or simply remembering that behind every unsolved case is a real person who deserves to be found and remembered. Until next time, stay safe, hug your loved ones a little tighter, and never forget that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become extraordinary mysteries that change everything forever.